My name is Tim. I'm one of the pastors here at the church. For the last 11 or so years, I've been the high school pastor, and I love getting to do what I get to do. And then also during the kind of this time of transition in RPYA, I get a chance to be present here with you guys. Also, I'll be teaching in here regularly, but also working with the team behind the scenes just to make sure that that this ministry is an awesome place for you to come as a young adult to dive into God's Word, to get to be in community with each other. And so it's just a fun kind of season to get to be involved in that. And a part of that for me is that this ministry meant a whole lot to me. A number of years ago that I won't completely spell out, when I was a young adult back in the day. In fact, my wife is here in the back. Silvana is here. We first really got to know each other as a part of this community in this room, as a part of this young adult ministry. I have a picture of us, actually. There we go. There we are. I know. You can tell how long ago it was by my American Eagle shirt. That's probably long gone. And that's what we looked like then. And then now we have a beautiful family. That's ours. Here we go. There's our youngest Joey and our oldest Samuel, and all the way on the other side is Lily. She's our middle child. She's awesome. And this probably would not have happened without this here in this room. This was a huge part of our relationship. It was a huge part of our individual growth with God. And so it's a pleasure of ours just to get to be involved in the growth of this ministry during this time and to help you all connect well with God and to connect with each other. Tonight we are wrapping up a whole week-long focus on the topic of prayer. If you're part of our Rocky Peak community, you know that this whole last week we've been diving into the idea of what does it look like to be people who are passionate about connecting with God in prayer. And so last week, Pastor Michael kicked it off with a Sunday message, a weekend message, all about how we want to be people who pray because prayer is how we pursue God and is how we partner with Him. And then last Sunday night in RPYA, we set up a time for a night of worship where we just really got to sit on and think about how important it is to be people who really want to pray. Right? If we want to make room for prayer in our life, we want to be people who are praying, we need to recognize that there's something in prayer that we get that we can't get somewhere else. We talked about a passage in the Old Testament that kind of lays out this thing where God He's confronting Israel and saying, hey, you have done two things. You've gone away from me, you've rejected me, the source of living water, and you've gone and dug dry wells instead. And we said, we don't want to be people who are going after the things that are really just leaving us empty. Instead, we want to be people who are passionate about connecting with God, that there's something in connecting with God that is bigger than what we have access to through anything else in our life. All of the other pursuits and things that we can chase after and all the other things that want to fill our attention and take it away don't offer the same thing that connecting with God offers to us. If you've been a part of what our church has been doing this week, there was a 5-week study that had 5 different videos that covered different ways that we can pray. There was a video and study on prayer walks and fasting, and one on praying the Lord's Prayer, and one on praying through Scripture. And then Friday was about the spiritual gift of praying in different languages or praying in tongues. We're a group of people at the church who that's been their experience. They got to kind of unpack that. And so if you missed any of that, those videos are all up on the Rocky Peak website still, and they're up on the YouTube channel. Those are great to go back to. And then Pastor Michael just kind of wrapped up our church's larger focus on this by going through 7 practical ways that we can be people who are growing in prayer. And so as a young adult ministry, as we kind of come to the end of this week, wherever you've been in kind of your engagement with this process, we want to kind of wrap up and focus in, take one of those 7 things that actually Michael talked about and take a magnifying glass to one of them specifically. The thing that for me, when I was a young adult wearing American Eagle and meeting my wife and doing all those things, the one thing that for me consistently always was tripping me up when it came to this. When I wanted to be someone who was consistent in my time with God, consistently getting to be spending time with Him alone, one-on-one, there was one area that constantly was always tripping me up because I would be excited and I would be on fire and I would go to do it and I would look back a week later and then all of a sudden it wasn't happening. I don't know if you've had that same experience, but I think it's incredibly common for us to want to connect with God. Have a night where we decide, you know what, this is the time. This is when it changes. And then look back and be like, I remember I was pretty sure I wanted to do that. And then we realize it never quite takes. And so today we're going to be kind of zooming in on that. But before we do that, I just want to do a short refresher on why prayer is important. I don't know if you're coming in, maybe it's your first time here. Maybe you were traveling the last couple of weeks. Maybe you've been in the middle of the end of your school semester. And so you've been your focus has been pulled in a couple different ways. And so I think it's important for us just to remember why prayer is so important. Of course, we come to church and we're expecting the guy who gets up there talking about the Bible to say that prayer is important. But there are certain things about prayer that if we don't remember, if we don't kind of refresh our mind, it's easy to kind of tune out and not really make the space in our heart and in our life that's necessary for us to engage with this. And so there's just 4 things that I want to touch on super briefly. One, that when it comes to prayer, prayer is a privilege that we have. Prayer is a privilege, that Jesus makes something possible in our life that is different than what the experience of humanity should be without him. The book of Hebrews really kind of zooms in on this as the author of Hebrews is writing to some believers who have been following Jesus, and now they're kind of being pulled towards maybe we go back to our old Jewish ways, maybe we should become Jewish again, or there's a lot of persecution where they are, and they're like, man, life would just be so much easier if we just kind of did the old thing. And the writer of Hebrews is saying hey, no, the old way has nothing in comparison to Jesus and what he's done. He uses this example that reminds us just the privilege that it is that Jesus has come and made a way for us to connect with God. He says in chapter 4, verse 14, therefore, since we have a great high priest, and he uses this picture throughout the book, talk about how Jesus is the one, he's the go-between between us and God. That God is perfect and we're messed up, and we needed someone to be a go-between for us, someone to take our concern before the perfect God of the universe. And Jesus did that by his own sacrifice. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. And then 2 verses later in verse 16, he says, let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Because of what Jesus has done, when we go to pray, we're not like the pagan nations of old who were just concerned with trying to appease the gods, so hopefully they might bless them and stay out of their business at the same time. We're not like people who are just going to God and hoping maybe that he cares about us. That when we've had a rough, difficult time, we've struggled, that sin that we wanted to put off in our life has kind of snuck back in. We don't need to go with our head held low, scared that God might smite us or ignore us. We know that we can go in with confidence because the blood of Jesus covers all of our wrong, and that we can go before God's throne and that there is grace there. That when we go to talk to him, we don't need to be afraid. I don't know what your relationship with your parents maybe is. I do know from over a decade of working with high school students that one of the things that impacts our relationship with God most closely is we kind of imagine him almost like responding to us the way our parents are. And I know sometimes I could have gone to my parents confidently, and other times I better keep it to myself, whatever was going on in my life. But that's not our relationship with God. We get to go in with confidence and unpack what's on our heart and know that he'll meet us there. Prayer is a privilege that we have because it is covered by what Jesus has done for us. Next, when it comes to prayer, prayer conforms our heart to God's heart. In the process of prayer, God takes our heart and works that into our heart becoming more like his, where we love the things that he loves and we recognize the evil that's in this world for what it is. And then oftentimes that process is a slow process of transformation that prayer plays a huge part in. In 2 Corinthians 3:18, it says, "And we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory." That's all of us. We're the ones with unveiled faces who are contemplating God's glory. Like, we get to think about who God is. Our faces aren't veiled anymore. We have a connection with him that's intimate because of what Jesus has done. We are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. So God is working this process of transformation in our life. He's making us into an image, a representation, a reflection of who Jesus is. In Matthew 6, Jesus is teaching his disciples how to pray. And as a part of what we call the Lord's Prayer, he says that a part of our prayer life should be saying, "God, would your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." A part of prayer is going and asking that what God wants to happen will happen. And naturally, as a part of that, God will draw out some of the things that we want to have happen that are different than his will. And sometimes those things are things that are totally benign, or even on the surface, they were like, there's nothing wrong with them, they're good. Other times it pulls out things that are maybe a little twisted in our heart, that are prideful in our heart, that are concerned about us and not our neighbors or not God's glory. And he'll kind of pull that out and compare that for us in that time of prayer of, "Hey, Tim, remember, this is what I want. And right now, you really want this right now. Tim, remember, I want what's good for your family, and you're kind of concerned with what makes your life easy. Remember, Tim, I want what's good for my glory, and right now you want people to focus on how awesome you are, which pales in comparison by a lot." And God will use those times to conform us. And then many times in prayer, we get brought to the same spot that Jesus was brought before going to the cross, where he prays in Luke 22:42, he says, "Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but your will be done." Prayer is the place where God meets our heart and does the difficult work of transformation. We can read about his will in his word. We can hear about it taught from up front. But if we don't have the courage to go face to face with him and be honest about where our will differs from his, we miss out on the work that he wants to do to transform us from the inside. When we don't take up the privilege of our confidence, when we don't go to him and be honest with him of, "God, I really want this kind of relationship with this person. I know that you tell me that I'm supposed to wait for that, but this is my path to goodness that I see in front of me." When we hide that from him as if he wouldn't know, then we miss out on what he wants to do when he meets us. His concern is less that your behavior would match some list of rules. His vision is to change your heart and your character to be like him. That obedience would flow from the inside of who we are, and prayer is a huge part of that process. The next thing about prayer is a massive part of our relationship with God. I probably could have workshopped that language a little bit better, but prayer is a huge part of our relationship with God. You can't have a relationship with someone without talking. You can't. Imagine if you had a buddy, talking to your buddy, he's like, bro, let me tell you about my new girlfriend. She's awesome. One, she's an influencer. And you're like, all right. For Jesus. Oh, a Christian influencer? Okay. Tell me more. Like, oh man, she lives here. She's like this. She loves these things. This is her favorite food. This is what her dog is like. This is where she lives. And you're like, wow, man, like she sounds pretty cool. Like, this is her favorite Bible verse. This is her, like, cool. Like, how did you guys meet? When did you guys start talking? Well, I mean, we're not really talking yet, but whenever she posts something, I'm first up to comment. And one of these days, she's going to note it. One, your friend doesn't have a girlfriend, and two, he's got something else, right? But it's not a relationship. Whatever is going on there, something is messed up. If there's no communication, there's no conversation, there is no relationship. Our relationship with God thrives on communication with him. Without regular time of prayer, it dwindles. The same way that our friendships thrive on communication, our relationship with our parents can sometimes live or die on communication, our relationship with anybody that's important to us does better with communication. So does our relationship with God. Right? He's given us human relationships that in many ways mirror what it looks like to have a relationship with him. And then lastly, when it comes to prayer, man, Jesus did it all the time. Jesus was God himself in the flesh. He was the perfect person. If there was anyone who could maybe be self-sufficient and wouldn't need to go to God with his cares and concerns, maybe it would be Jesus. But instead what we see is multiple times throughout his ministry, he would get time away to pray. Before choosing his disciples, he got time away to pray. Before starting his ministry in a kind of a big sense, in a big way that people were noticing him, he got time away to pray. After performing miracles and doing teachings, when all the crowd wanted to come around him, he got time away from them to pray. How many of us in today's world, if all of a sudden all the influence and the attention was starting to build up, how many people would take that moment and be like, you know what, I'm going to turn this off for a bit and go get time away on my own? And yet Jesus did that consistently, where he would connect with the Father. It's out of his relationship with God, out of his relationship with the Father, that his ministry and his life would flow. So much so that his disciples, who grew up in a world kind of soaked in prayer, where many Jewish people, they would pray multiple times throughout the day, at 9 o'clock, at 12 o'clock, in the middle of the day, at 3 o'clock. They would have times of prayer. Prayer was something that they were familiar with. They go to Jesus and they're like, Jesus, teach us how to pray. There was something about the way that Jesus spoke to his Father that was different than what they were noticing in the people around them, or what they had learned. Right? Jesus, his life was built on a foundation of his relationship with the Father. And so if it was important to Jesus, it's probably important in my life too. If he needed that, as God of the universe in flesh, as one of us, if he needed that to do what he needed to do, I probably need that too, and so do you. And so prayer is super important, but what I want to talk about is the number one thing that I think gets in our way, especially as young adults, but if I'm honest, it still is consistently tripping me up in my life because of how I'm built, because of my personality style. It was 1,000% true for me, and it still is true for me, but maybe a little less. The number one thing that gets in the way is time. The number one thing, the thing that gets difficult, the thing that makes it tough to go and pray and talk with God consistently is time. Time fills up so quickly. So often in my life, I would want to be intentional with God. I'd be coming off of a camp or serving at a camp, or I would come off of a really amazing worship night, or coming out of a message that someone had given. And I'd be like, yes, like this is the time that it's going to change. My heart was in the right spot, but the change would never happen. Right? I would pick maybe the time of day that I was like, you know what, this is when I'm at my best, which is great advice, by the way. If you're going to spend time with God, spend time with him that you're at your best. For some people, for a lot of life, you'll hear people suggest like, oh, the first thing you do when you wake up, so that way it impacts the rest of your day. But man, when I was 21, 22, the worst time for me was when I would first wake up in the day. I was groggy. I didn't know my own name, much less anything else. It was just like, I was on autopilot for the first hour and a half of my life until I was in the middle of my first class or whatever. Like, I was not my best in the beginning of the day. For me, the best time of my day was the middle of the afternoon. And so I'd be like, you know what? Like, middle of the afternoon, that's when I'm going to pray. I'm going to make time. I'm going to do it. And before I knew it, the busyness of life would slam me. Things would change. I would have a bunch of work that needed to get done, or my work schedule for the jobs I was working would change. All of my time would fill up. People would want my attention. They would want to go hang out or go do something or plan a trip or do whatever. And I wouldn't be able to get my prayer in. And part of that was because I was terrible at prioritizing and planning my life. I am not a planner. Right? Some of us, We are plan focused. We like to just have things organized. We like to know exactly what's going to happen with our day. If I could live the rest of my life without ever seeing a calendar, I would love that. If I could just live my life as it came, I would love that. That's how I'm wired. I love when the plans change and things are different and we get to take life in an exciting and new direction. And some of you are sweating just thinking about that because you're built more like my wife. My wife is like planned, organized, regimented, please nothing shift by like 10 minutes. That would cause stress. And so we're very different and we balance each other well, which is great. We've learned over the years how to balance that. As you can imagine, there's also been those times where maybe it wasn't so balanced, but for sure for me in my life, man, I'm not a planner. I like to take things as they come. And as a result, I would just do the things that made sense in the moment. And frequently that meant picking what was right in front of my face to do, whatever was pressing right then, and not being good at prioritizing the things that I had already said were important in life. It was no longer about making a priority of doing what I had said, no, this is what I want to do. Instead, it was just kind of whatever was right there, right then. And so I want to show kind of a difference the difference that prioritizing our life can make. This is an example that is not my own, but that in 11 years I've never used in high school, which is crazy. Okay, so this dusty glass represents the amount of time that any of us has, right? How many hours in a day? How many hours in a week? I don't know. I mean, neither. Whatever 24 times 7 is. And so we have a few different things here. We have these rocks that my wife picked up on a walk that represent kind of the priorities, the important things in our life. We've got this one that my daughter painted with a frog because it looks cool. And so these are like maybe this is your schoolwork. This is going to actual work, the one that makes money. This is spending time with the people who are most important to you, and maybe spending time with God. And I wish I could come up with a pun that has to do with the frog, but I got nothing. And so these are the important things, right? And then the sand that's in this bucket, this just kind of represents the other things that end up filling our time, right? It could be the TV shows, it could be the scrolling, it could be the random conversations with someone that are like not super maybe like life-giving. It could be whatever, just the random stuff that kind of fills in our life. And if we're not careful, these things that just kind of pop up, that come out of nowhere, that will like take our attention, if these are the things that fill our time first because they're the ones that are right in front of our face, because oftentimes some of these other priorities, like especially like the people who are close to us and our time with God, we're not always thinking about that consistently all the time. If we fill our life first with the things that just kind of come and go, and then we start like, oh, well, I definitely need to like go to work, and I probably should get my schoolwork done. Ooh, that's all not, schoolwork's not all fitting in there. And then I probably should have some time for people that are important to me. And this is not going to, and then this is definitely going to, it's not going to fit, right? It just doesn't fit if we try to get the big priorities in after the things that are small have kind of filled up the space. But, please don't break, all right? Let's see if I can do this right. Because sometimes, even if we try to fit in our priorities first, they don't always get in there easily. Let's say we're like, okay, I'm going to make sure that I schedule my time with God. Please don't break. All right. I'm going to make sure I schedule my time with God, and then I'm going to make sure that I get my classwork done, and I'm going to give work a schedule that actually makes sense, that I can achieve with my life. And you know what? I'm going to make sure to get my priorities with people in there. Look, I got all of my big things in. That's great. And then you know what? Then there's still lots of time to be spending. I get to watch a few shows on Netflix. I hear Shogun on Hulu is pretty good or whatever. I'm going to get some time in with some friends. We're just going to go on a Slurpee run or whatever. That's what I used to do. I don't know if you guys do Slurpee runs. I used to. And then all of that fits in. Oh, almost fits in. We have a vacuum. That's good. And then it fits significantly better. When you fit the big things in first, the small things can fill in the gaps. When we let the small things fill up all the time in our life, that's when oftentimes we find out that we don't have the space for the things that are most important. And so this is a nice way to show with volume, what ends up happening with the time in our life that so often we feel like is just gone before we know it, right? How many times have you thought you would have time to work on that project that's due and you're pulling an all-nighter? How many times have you thought that you were going to be able to make time to do the thing that's important, and then all of a sudden you're out of time? It's dirtier than I thought it would be, but I hope, hopefully that makes some visual sense. Right? This is why I think oftentimes we can't find time for God, because we're not fitting it in first or as a part of our priorities. We're hoping to find time in the gaps. But so many other things are going to fill into those gaps that it's going to be difficult to wedge in our time with God. All the junk or the sand is going to fill up our time, and we're going to have trouble with our priorities. Proverbs 13:4 in the New Living Translation says, "Lazy people want much, but get little. But those who work hard will prosper." And I think oftentimes the difference between being lazy and working hard isn't maybe even the effort that goes in or the time that goes in, but it's the intentionality that goes into the order with which we choose to do things. All right, we're trying to fill up all our time, and we're trying hard to get to the things that are important, but our time is being wasted on one more game of Helldivers, or 45 more minutes of hanging out with our friends, or hitting the snooze button 4 times in a row until we're running 15 minutes late for our shift at work that we were going to spend time with God in the car before we got there, but now we're like trying to hopefully get there before anyone notices that we're late. Right? We let the other things fill up our life instead. After our daughter was born, our middle daughter, Lily, she was born with a heart condition, and so that turned our life upside down for at least a year. At some point, after the dust kind of settled from that, I looked back on who I was, and I was like, oh, I'm the least healthy I've been the whole time we've been married. And so there was a point in my life where I had to take a hard look at my life, because I really wanted to be in better shape, but I could just never quite get it together. And I realized that I really wanted to look better and feel better, but I wanted the body of someone who works out and eats well without working out and eating well. I don't know if you've ever been there before. We were like, man, I'd really like that, but it's too much work. But I really would like to have it. I was kind of like hoping for that, like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man experience. Have you ever seen the old Tobey Maguire Spider-Man where he like gets bit and he wakes up the next day and he's like, I have abs. Like I was like, maybe one day, come on, spider bite. Like maybe that'll happen. I was like, I'd really like to change and be different. And I realized that the body that I had was a reflection of years of choices that I had made, and that it would take years of choices to get the body that I wanted. And I had to ask myself, okay, is that really going to be worthwhile? Is that something that I want to do? And so for some of us, when it comes to our relationship with God, because I don't really, this is not about how you look, but if we reflect back, right, because the Bible talks about how physical training is of some value, but training in godliness is so much more significant in our life. That for some of us, we want a relationship with God that comes from putting in the hard work of getting close to Him, but we want it to happen magically for us. Right? If you want the life of a person who prays every day, then you have to pray every day. If you want to know the God who reveals Himself in His Word, you have to spend time in His Word. If you want the blessings of obedience and living life the way that He's laid it out to be lived, then you have to do the hard work of putting off the old and putting on the new. That if we want to be the person God is calling us to do, if we want to be the person that God is calling us to be, then we need to actually choose to do the things that come along with that. I saw an exercise scientist and professor being interviewed, because these are the things that I'm into now as wild 21-year-old Tim in that picture would never have believed that. I saw him being interviewed on what's the best way to work out, what's the most efficient way to work out, because people are obsessed with trying to find the best way to do the thing. And he talked about in the conversation, he's like, well, yeah, there are better things and there are worse things, and science says this and shows this, and this is what we're learning now. But the truth is that the person who's been going consistently for 5 years in a row, 4 days to the gym every day, is always going to beat out the person who's going every once in a while, but doing the most optimal, best exercises. And so often we get wrapped up with trying to find the best way to spend time with God. What's going to be the best plan? What's going to be the best time? What's going to be, and we almost wait to start any plan with God until we can find the perfect way to spend time with God. But the real growth happens in our life with consistency, being the person who just is there, connecting with Him regularly, in a regular rhythm in our life. Whether it's difficult or whether it's hard, whether it works well or it doesn't on any given day, that putting in the effort to grow and be with Him regularly is what's going to lead to us looking back in 3 years and being amazed at the things that He's done in our life that we never could have achieved on our own. And so tonight, I want to kind of cap off with a little bit of an exercise for you guys to do. I want to give you guys a kind of a stretch of time to really think through what your lives look like. Because for me, I would sit here in a message like this and I'd be like, Tim, you're right. The rocks, the sand, I got to put the rocks in first. I got to do the thing. And I would leave here and I'd go hang out in and out and I'd be up until 12 and my friends would all come over to my house or whatever. And I would wake up the next day and I would just start the cycle over again because I hadn't really paused to really think about it and consider what maybe God would have me do with my schedule. And so what I want to do is give you some time on the handout that you guys should have gotten. There's a whole calendar for a week on the back there with blocks out for hours. And so what I want to do is give you a chance in a little bit to kind of like sketch out what a normal weekly schedule looks like for you. But before we do that, I want to walk you through a little bit of one example of that so you can kind of get a sense of what I mean in my mind. This isn't just like plan your week and like find the specific time, but I want you to have an idea of what your life looks like because life is oftentimes more complicated than we give it credit for. And so we're going to put up the first slide here. This is an empty calendar. This is my favorite kind of calendar. This is how I wish life always was. Where it's like, look at all the time I have to do whatever I want, whatever comes my way. But unfortunately, this is not how life usually looks. Thank you, DJ, for putting this graphic together, by the way, and putting the handout together as very helpful. Okay, so let's fill in some of the important things first, right? So it's a Sunday. You're here at RPYA. Maybe you're really invested, and you know what? You go to main service and YA first. We'll throw that up there. So there it is. There's like yellow. That's your church time. You got an hour and a half there for church in the morning, and then you're here on this night as well. Awesome. Next, we're going to throw our class schedule in here. Here's like 3 to 4 classes that might be coming up, right? You're taking classes at Moorpark or CSUN or whatever, and so here's your class schedule. This would have been, and for some of us, like we're taking more classes than this, but let's just say, like, there's our class. We worked it out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We don't have to worry about school on Friday. And look at all that time we have in the mornings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. How nice. Then we've got our work schedule. We've got to get work in there. Here's 29 hours of work. At the coffee shop or Target or whatever it is that you're working. Let's say this is McKenna and you've got a closing shift on Monday, you've got an opening shift a couple times, you got whatever, right? You've got your different shifts that are going on there. Then you know what? You're really invested in the church and you're serving in one of our youth ministries. Let's just say high school ministry, wink, wink. And we'll throw that up there too. You're serving on Wednesday night. You're leading a life group for them and you're even showing up on Saturdays to be present. Man, look at all that church stuff that's starting to fill in there. That's pretty cool. And you know what? You've got your own life group that you're going to also on Thursday nights. And so we're going to pop that in there. And there's your life. Okay, man, look at all the time that you're setting aside for being involved in church. And like, okay, this time's getting a little squeezed here. You know what? What's really important, like we're not balanced people if we're not spending time with our friends. So we got to get our friend time in there, right? Whoa, we jumped forward a little bit there. Pull back the brown. We can't pull back the brown. That's fine. Okay, pink. That's the time with the guys, the gals, whoever it is in our life that we're close with. Brown is homework because that's how we feel about homework. I'm just saying, Sorry, I've done youth ministry for a long time, and so illusions, right? I mean, no one likes homework. And then, you know what? It's important to sleep. We got to get some sleep in there. And you'll see, like, we're sleeping through most of the 6 o'clock hour, because who's a human being before 6 o'clock? And then, you know what? On Sunday, we try to get a little bit of a good start to the week. And then on Monday, that's actually when we're catching up on our sleep. And then, I mean, Wednesday, we're just hanging out late. Like, who even knows? 12 is where the calendar stops, but it keeps going. And Friday, Saturday, who's going to bed early on a Friday and a Saturday? Like, here's what our calendar is starting to look like. Right, and so here we go. Here's our week, and then we think to ourselves, you know what? I want to spend time with Jesus. And okay, when am I best? When am I at my sharpest? And you know what? It really is those morning hours. The rest of the time in my life, like the rest of the day, just kind of like is draining my battery. If I want to give my best time to Jesus, it's the morning. And we already noticed that if we do that, there are 3 times that just doesn't work because we've got opening shifts at work, and it's just like no one's waking up early before an opening shift. I mean, maybe you are, and that's great, but I'm not. And it's just like, and we can see if we're not careful about that, then we've got those 3 that aren't really going to work out. And then Sunday kind of does. I mean, like, spending alone time before going to church always feels a little weird to me, and so that might not happen because you're like, you know what, I'm already getting some time with Jesus. And so it ends up, if we're not intentional, if we're not careful, there's not a whole lot of time to squeeze in there. Or if you're like me and you're like, you know what, afternoons, those are my times. Here's what I would run into on a regular basis. I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to spend the afternoon with Jesus. Apparently never. I guess if class gets canceled, I'll have some quiet time. And this would be my problem. And this would be the problem I think a lot of us fall into. And so what I want to do is give you maybe 5 minutes or so just to kind of sketch out what a normal week looks like for you, right? Use the pens that are there, block out, okay, here's where I'm normally working, here's where I'm normally at school. Start with the things that you can't move, right? There are some things in your life that right now you just can't move. You can't change your class schedule. Work is going to schedule you when they're going to schedule you, right? Like, put in those things that you can't move. Then think about prayer. Before you just put in all of the other things that just end up happening, if you were to spend time with the Lord, where would that fit after the immovable things are kind of there? And then take a moment to think through, okay, what normally happens then in that time slot? Where I put prayer, what would my attention oftentimes be pulled towards in those moments? And so I want to give you about 5 minutes. Unless you really think that through. You don't have to plan out next week necessarily, but get a visual on where is your time going? What does life look like for you? And then I'll be back up in about 5 minutes. So my encouragement to all of you, I know for some of us this maybe was more helpful than for others, right? Some of us, we came in with our color-coded, we've got our physical trapper keeper notebook of calendar ready to go. We have our life figured out. And for others of us, we're like, I've never thought about my time like this before. Hopefully that gets the gears turning a little bit, right? Like in that few minutes that's not gonna solve everything when it comes to sketching out and finding a time for prayer with God. But what I encourage you to do is this week, work with God to carve out some appropriate time to spend with Him. Work with Him to let Him maybe call out like, hey, you know what? You've been dumping some time into this. Maybe it needs to look like this instead, right? That might mean something as drastic as limiting your availability at work a little bit more. It might mean setting a time that you go to bed and really sticking to it so that you can actually get up when the alarm goes off in the morning instead of snoozing it a whole chorus of times. It might mean something simple that I've heard other people do that is a simple thing to say, but a difficult thing to do of like, hey, no Bible, no breakfast. Like if I don't get to it, then I'm going to limit myself in that way. I'm telling you, that would motivate me a lot. Even as not a morning person, if you take my breakfast away, it's going to be rough. Maybe it means not going out at night every single night if you haven't had your God time that day. Right? You're like, you know what? I haven't had my God time. It's not time to go out yet. Like, I'm going to be 15 minutes late for my friends. And your friends are like, no, please, no. I'm I'm going to be 15 minutes late because I'm going to get in that time with God before I head out the door. Maybe it means not having Netflix or YouTube or Twitch or whatever else on until you've had that time to connect with the God of the universe who cares intimately about you before jumping into whatever piece of entertainment we're going to fill our life with. Right? Maybe it's so drastic, you're like, you know what, in the morning, I'm not going to pick up my phone until I've picked up my Bible. Right? Which might even mean setting your alarm in a different way and figuring out different ways to manage and get your life ready to go. But that's going to depend on how God has wired you and what his call on your life is going to be. But if we want to be people who have a radical commitment to God and connect with him on a regular basis, that's going to mean some radical and different changes to our life and how we live. But remember that consistency is going to be the most important thing when it comes to your growth. Not about finding the perfect way to do it. Not about not messing up. Right? When you've missed a day, don't let it throw you off. Just get back on whatever the plan is. When the first plan doesn't work out and you've tried it for a week and 2 weeks and you just can't get the hang of it, scrap it and find a new one. Because constantly throwing yourself at this is going to get you farther than just trying to do it the perfect way and failing and let failure move you into a spot of defeat in your relationship with God. Right? Prayer is such a privilege, but we have to take advantage of what Jesus has made possible for us.